Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for tuning in to another video for P3 Golf, where we talk passion, performance, and purpose. Today, we're going to cover a fun little topic just purely on wedges. I put a poll up on my Arizona Golfers page with all my friends over there, and just wanted to ask you guys some general questions for your feedback so we can make a quick video. We're just going to do a quick one on basically a variety of topics that I wrote down, polled you guys to see what you found most important for you on wedges, what maybe you don't understand, or you just want some more information on, okay? So definitely a performance and a purpose video today. And with that respect, let's begin. So one of the first things I have written down is what is bounce, just to define it. So I have a couple of wedges. Let's see, so 60 degree, right? Got a Vokey here. And what bounce is, if I can make the camera focus on me, is from the leading edge to the highest point of the sole of the golf club when it interacts with a turf, right? So if we are working like that, we're talking about how much relief there is to the leading edge. And then that's usually measured in degrees, and all of these wedges, they usually have it noted with two different numbers that you'll see. So for instance, that's my 60 degree. It's a 6008M. M is the name of the grind that Vokey uses on that. The 8 is the degrees of bounce, and then 60 is obviously the loft of that wedge. And then there are basically two kinds of bounce. If we want to take it a step further, you're going to be talking static bounce, which is what that number is going to mean on the wedge when you see it listed. That would be a full square position of the wedge, where there's no actual, let's say, technique being used other than very, very square. So club square to the club face, we're not opening it way up, we're not shutting it, we're not leaning the shaft and delofting it, our hands aren't back and adding any loft. It is from a square position. Effective bounce can change based on the grind that we have. So a good example, again, using Vokey in this situation, and tons of other brands, by the way, like Callaway, I actually really like their wedges as well. But if we're using, let's say, like the Callaway, or in this instance, let's say the Vokey, a K grind is a very, very wide sole wedge, and now they even offer, let's say, a low bounce K and a standard bounce K, and I believe it's 6 degrees and 14 degrees of bounce. So what then you're talking about is how much relief from the leading edge, that gap being either larger with 14 or lower with the 6, but you still have the width of the sole there, which is really going to be more of that effective bounce, how you are using that sole in the turf or in a bunker or in like adverse lie conditions, right? So you might have a low bounce wedge where maybe the leading edge sits lower to the ground, but because of how wide it is, it's really, really effective in maybe a bunker, okay? So that basically leads us into the second note I have here is what are the grinds and what do they do? So those grinds, you're basically talking how much relief there is on a wedge. A standard wedge, we're going to call it a full sole wedge. There is no extra cuts usually made, let's say in the trailing portion. I'll grab another one here. This is my 50 degree, so this is actually a perfect example. So 50 degree, I play a 12F in the Vokey, and the F is full sole. So that simply means we don't have any trailing edge. We didn't take any meat off the heel in here. So essentially you're playing that wedge most often in a square position, maybe a full swing position, maybe just a square face chip. You're not really using that bounce necessarily, or I should say the wedge and the grind of that wedge necessarily to hit, let's say, open shots, closed shots. You're having your hands back or way forward to manipulate it. It's usually a pretty square face shot. And then when you get into something else, so let's just say we're going through Vokey stuff because I know a lot of you guys play Vokeys. Let's go into a sand wedge. So I also play a D grind. The D delta is basically a high bounced M grind. So it has heel relief, it has a little bit of toe relief, it has trail relief, but it's got a lot of camber from that leading edge. So that camber basically lets me have the versatility of If it's softer condition, I don't have to worry about the wedge digging into the turf as much. But the grind also allows me to have versatility in opening that club face, keeping the leading edge down to the turf if I need to hit a different kind of shot. It allows me to have a little bit of that toe relief. So again, opening it, squaring it up, maybe raising my hands in a lower chip so I don't have that toe grab in the turf. It'll still have plenty of bounce if I use it out of the bunker. So that wedge is definitely kind of my magic wedge. It has a lot of jobs to do, kind of that jack of all trades, but really master of none. And then going into my 60, I play an 08M. So it's the lower bounce. It has my highest amount of loft. It has a lot of relief all along that radius. Okay. That is going to allow me to play, let's say, the most extreme shots in maybe the tightest turf conditions. And when you hear maybe tight turf, think of, like almost hitting a golf ball off of that really hard packed dirt, almost like a cart path essentially is like the tightest lie possible, like concrete, right? No room to really miss it. Those terrible bunkers that we get in Arizona all the time that are almost like rock hard compact dirt. We don't have any sand in them. Just a really, really tight fairway, a firm, hard fairway would be another example of needing a little less bounce to allow the leading edge to get into the turf under the ball to get the grooves on the ball, which then creates that spin that we're all after. And obviously technique with strike and hitting down on it and all that stuff. So I think that kind of covers grinds. And then, one of you guys also mentioned like grinds specifically, let's say based in Arizona. So I'm in Arizona. Unfortunately, we have a couple of different seasons here where we have, let's say, our winter season kind of starting in October, November, lasting through maybe the end of April. This year was actually great. Like it was pretty soft through, the first couple of weeks of May. But essentially during that time, it's cooler temperatures here. We overseed our fairways, roughs and stuff like that. So it's ryegrass. We have way more water on the golf course. And when you have that happen, you have way softer turf conditions. You basically need higher bounce to deal with the turf, right? If you took like a really, really low bounce wedge in really, really soft turf conditions, you might be subject to sticking that leading edge into the turf a little bit. It tends to dig too much. That's when we hit those like little chili dip fat chips and pitches around the greens that annoy all of us. Probably not playing enough bounce. Now, is there technique involved there? Absolutely, there is technique involved there. But that would be, let's say, one season. And then the other season that we deal with would be summer here, right? And then we scalp our golf courses. The ryegrass can't really survive when it gets too hot. So we cut that way down. The Bermuda comes right back. And now we have a very, very grainy grass during the summer. It tends to firm up really, really hard out here. And now all of a sudden we have tight turf conditions. You have grain to deal with where maybe you need a little chamfer on a leading edge grind. Callaway does a fantastic job with those. I loved that on my Callaway wedges. And that helps you kind of get the leading edge down without it digging and catching the grain in the Bermuda grass. But yeah, you're going to need usually some lower bounce wedge options there in the summer. And then of course we have the elephant in the room. Our bunkers here are usually very bad. I know a couple of courses are making strides and trying to make them better. We don't all get to play private clubs where they actually have the budget to maintain the sand and replenish and keep those bunkers in really good condition. So often we actually have a very volatile bunker situation in Arizona. So you might get into a bunker and you have a little bit of sand in one, and then the very next hole you might get into another bunker and it's hard packed and you can't even get the leading edge under the ball if you took a full swing and just clip ball first, right? So that's delicate. What I like to try and do, as I mentioned with my own wedges, is to kind of have some variance where I go some really, really, let's say, low bounce, some medium bounce, and some full bounce to give me some spectrum of my wedge grinds, my bounce availability, to give me shot versatility, give me seasonality in my wedges. So that definitely plays a part in my wedge selection. and how to then fit for that wedge, right? So then let's take it a step further. All right, technique with those grinds, right? If you are somebody who's very, very steep angle of attack, you tend to take way bigger divots, way more turf on your wedge shots, pitch shots. If you are someone who's very shallow, you're going to be sweeping that ball off of the top of the turf. You're going to be a lower bounce player. You may not even need as much versatility in your wedge grinds, or maybe you just happen to be a lower bounce profile player also. The other thing to keep in mind is shaft lean, right? Are you somebody who at impact, you get, a ton of forward shaft lean, right? And then you really use the leading edge and then just that chamfer in the squareness of the wedge? Or are you somebody who leaves the hands very back, right? And you actually use way more middle or trail edge of your bounce? So that definitely is a different way to look at bounce for each player. And that's why the best way to fit someone for wedges, hands down, is get them out on a golf course, good golf balls, a couple of turf conditions, a few different variances and grinds, and ask them to hit shots, right? So you got to hit them. A good fitter knows what to look for. A good player knows what to look for in terms of the sound of the strike, how much turf a player is taking on a particular shot, and then watching that technique for someone to determine their wedge grinds. Let's see, going quick here. Matching shafts to irons. That's always been a fun one. So by and large, I don't necessarily match exactly shaft to shaft from, let's say, your pitching wedge and 9-iron and so on into your wedges. I do like to match the shaft brand and model, but usually I either go slightly heavier and softer in flex. And the reason is, let's say for myself, I play Modus Tour 130Xs in my irons. In my wedges, I play 130 stiff in these. So I'm keeping the weight up. I already play a very heavy iron shaft, but I'm also usually not swinging my irons anywhere near as hard as I'm trying to swing my wedges as hard as my irons. And I'm not trying to swing my wedges that hard either. So I want a little bit more feel. That softness to the shaft kind of lets it have a little bit more play, so I have a little bit more touch around the greens. I can feel the club head a little bit more. And that's kind of the base recommendation I give to a lot of people. Now, if you were fit into graphite, some pretty lightweight stuff, I definitely recommend going a little heavier there with your graphite iron shafts. I would put graphite in your wedges again. You don't have to. You can go with a lightweight steel. But let's say, for example, somebody gets fit to a UST Smack Wrap regular flex iron shaft, graphite iron shaft. I use that a lot. Love the product. It's awesome. Comes in usually somewhere between like 68 and 77 grams, depending on flex. I would probably start you around 80 to up to maybe 90, even 105 in your wedges for shafts. Keep it regular. Like, I wouldn't say you have to go all the way down to senior there, because you definitely need some rigidity to deal with those bunker shots, deal with that like heavier rough. And obviously the courses that you play takes a part in this, right? If we were out in the Midwest and you have to deal with a lot of heavy, thick rough, you might actually stay steel. You don't want to have too high of torque in the iron shaft, because you don't want the face angle opening or closing a lot as you as the grass grabs the hosel and the club face as you hit those short game shots. So you want something a little bit more rigid there and a little bit more beefy. But by and large, I don't necessarily match them. I like to stay same weight, slightly heavier, and maybe a flex softer. And just to give you an example, I believe, last time I checked, Rory McIlroy, he plays Project X 7.0s, which is like rebar stiff, 130 gram rifles. I believe he still plays Project X 6.5 rifles in his wedges. So he's still playing extra stiff. I mean, the guy's crazy strong, but he does still soften up his wedges because he's not trying to hit them as hard. He's trying to play distance and feel. Lofts. What lofts should you play? So I would say 90% of golfers, maybe more, aren't, single digit handicaps, right? So what I recommend often in your iron set, get the matching approach / gap / utility wedge, depending on the brand, right? So pitching and the next one, whatever, let's say they come with now. And the main reason there, it's still going to be full swing club for most players. You're not going to have this, utility Swiss Army knife in your wedge game where you need this many wedges, this many grinds, this many bounces. I would say usually fitting that and then just a sand and a lob wedge for most people gets the job totally done. And it simplifies it a little bit more. And the reason I like that is, let's just say your pitching wedge, these days they get strong, right? 43, 44, 45 degrees. Let's say the gap wedge comes in at 50. I like going like 54, 58, or even maybe 54 and 60 or 55 and 60 as a pairing there to keep some big loft gapping. And the reason there is people don't hit their wedges super, super consistent. They don't hit the ball super solid. You're going to run into maybe your wedges clumping together because you won't have a super confident defined yardage. Now, the more established wedge player you are, the more confidence you have, the more consistent you become. I'm going to let you work that out with your fitter or your instructor and hit shots on the range. One thing I will say in addition to that, a lot of the pitching wedges and gap wedges now that are, let's say, full iron set, not and how do I say it? Like in the player's distance and game improvement categories, not that player's iron category, but the game improvement distance iron. The spins are lower on those than, let's say, your standard gap wedge in a wedge from, let's say, a Vokey, a Titleist, a Callaway Jaws, a Ping Glide, a Wilson Staff. They're different, right? So the grooves are going to be different. It changes the spin rates there. So you actually might have to, what I call, loft chase a little bit. So again, if that gap wedge is 50, you might actually need like a 53, because that next wedge, that sand wedge, is going to spin so much more than your gap wedge that your yardage gap might actually end up being 15 yards and only 3 degrees apart. And then you kind of have to figure out, all right, what is another 12 to 15 yards on the next one? That might be 57, right? And then you just have to get fit and bend your wedges. It's not that big of a deal, but I definitely recommend getting fit to the yardage and the purpose. Don't think of it as, 4 degrees, 4 degrees, 4 degrees, or 5, or whatever it is, right? Hit the club to the yardage and make sure that the grinds are doing the job that you're asking them to do. And then the last thing here I have written down is, when should I be using the wedges around the golf course? Course condition dependent, player and swing dependent, technique dependent. I'll tell you, like, for me, I will hit up to pitching wedge out of a green side bunker. And when would I use pitching wedge? When I have a really, really long bunker shot, because the ball's going to come out a little bit lower, it's going to come out a little faster, not as much spin. So maybe I've got like a pin all the way in the back of the green. Let's say it's like 40, 50 feet of green, and then I've got like another 10 or 12 yards of bunker. Well, now I'm talking about like a 20-yard shot. I'm probably going to land in that 15 to 20-yard range and let the ball release. So that might be a pitching wedge or a gap wedge bunker shot. Now, conversely, let's say I've got 6 feet of green to work with, the flag, and maybe a big slope that runs away from me, and I need to try and get really risky with a bunker shot, need to hit it a little bit harder, a little bit more spin, a little bit higher. Then I'm grabbing my 60 degree, I'm opening that thing up, and I'm taking a little bit more risk shot, trying to play that distance a little bit differently. Kind of going back to what we said with grinds, leading edge, trail edge, what kind of shot am I hitting? Am I trying to hit a low spinning shot? Am I hitting a mid trajectory shot? Am I hitting a high shot? What's my lie like? Do I have the grain with me? Is the grain into me? Is it really soft? Is it really firm? Based on our wedge selection and those course condition criteria, we need to figure out which one is going to give us the highest probability to get the putt close, or the ball close to the hole, to get us a putt, right? The biggest thing I see with amateurs, I gave a lesson yesterday, and every single shot that I, let's say, evaluated him on, he pulled a 60 degree, no matter what he did. And, he had a couple of great shots, but a couple of his misses, flubbed it, right? He's got 30, 40 yards to the hole, like a pitch, right? And he flubs it and gets it just short of the leading edge of the green, or onto the collar. And it's like, well, our goal needs to be get the ball, just putting first, right? So maybe a slightly lower lofted club to give him a little bit more assurance, a better window to have some success would have been a better shot selection. So we walked around the practice green, short game area, walked through those shots, and I made him hit clubs he's never hit before. I had him even chip with an 8-iron a few times for that low running shot, just as a super safe club. Maybe some adverse turf or a big slope in the green, just to show him like it's not that difficult. Take your putting technique, right? Usually we get a little bit more on our left side, and we just make a putting stroke at it and hit that low running shot. Just probability, right? So that pretty much covers everything today. Totally went too long. Sorry about that. I can't talk much faster. Please leave comments in the description or in the video for me, and I would love to hear from you guys. Hopefully this helps answer some questions on your wedge game. And always thank you so much for supporting the channel.